Hello, everybody. Welcome to Podcaster Showcase, a live monthly broadcast brought to you by the International Podcast Day team. I am Dave Lee, co-founder of International Podcast Day, and thank you so much for joining us today. Each month, we focus and showcase podcasters and voices from around the world, and this broadcast today is no different. For January, we welcome Melissa and Josephine, co-directors of Africa Podfest and Africa Podcast Day. Joining the conversation is Vicky, Dan, and Simi. It's exciting to have 3 African countries featured today: Kenya, South Africa, and Sierra Leone. Today, these 5 will be talking about where's the money in African podcasting. But before we get started, I wanted to share that Africa Podcast Day is coming up on February 21st, just a few weeks away. So in conjunction with Africa Podcast Day, Africa Podfest is happening. The Podfest showcases developments in African podcasting, convenes players in the new media ecosystem, and boosts the production of podcasts in the region. I'm sure Melissa and Josephine will be talking about the event more coming up, but right now head over to africapodcastfestival.com to learn more. So let's welcome the team to Podcaster Showcase. How is everybody doing today?
Hey, I think we're all in the room. Thank you, Dave.
No problem.
I am doing fine. Thank you, Dave.
Good. Well, I will gonna bring Dan in here, and yeah, this is very exciting times. I appreciate everybody coming in here and wanting to talk about where's the money in African podcasting. So I'm going to duck out of the conversation here and leave it to the group here to have a great conversation. And we look forward to your contributions to Podcaster Showcase. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dave. Great, fantastic. Hello, everyone. Thank you to International Podcast Day for inviting us to speak about where is the money in African podcasting. My name is Melissa Mbugua, for those of you who don't know me, and I am co-director at Africa Podfest. Africa Podfest exists to inspire and elevate African podcasters. And we're behind Africa Podcast Day 2021, which is a one-day festival for joyful connections, activities, and spaces that support African podcasting. As the only researchers on African podcasting across the continent, we know for sure that African podcasters are here to stay. And we've been doing audience surveys since 2017 to discover and share data that demonstrates how engaged African audiences are. For us, this is just the beginning. Across our work, we showcase developments in African podcasting. We bring together players in the new media ecosystem, and our aim is to boost the production of African podcasts in the region. So we organize Africa Podcast Day on February 12th every year, as well as Africa Podfest, which is sort of a self-named gathering on African podcasting. We also organize a series of events throughout the year called the Unconference on Podcasting. So we're really excited to be able to get into this conversation because we know that podcasting has taken root in Africa, with very many people increasingly just joining the foray as podcasters, and even more people tuning in as listeners. And as we're still in the early days, most podcasters are investing their own resources, as our guests today are also part of this movement. And a lot of people who are investing in podcasting in Africa are doing so, at least at the beginning, without clarity or expectation about financial return. And that's what we are here to discuss. So for those who have managed to generate income, it's come from different spaces like advertising, sponsorship, grants, and in some cases, like live event ticketing. So we know that there is potential for podcasting in Africa to grow economically, because we also know that there are very many people joining the digital space in Africa, and this is growing. And Africans are hungry for African stories online. So we know that there is demand and there's potential, but the big question is, where do we go from here?
Exactly, Melissa. So, for those who don't know me, my name is Josephine. I'm also a co-director at Africa Podfest. I'm super excited for today's conversation because I know that a lot of you who are watching and who are part of this are in the continent and who listen to African podcasts. So, audio is a really accessible and popular medium. Phones come with a little audio app where you can play radio, and now, podcasts. So podcasting has that power to connect communities in ways that surpass what radio has achieved because, it's self-generated content. It's fresh, it's new. There's lots of great storytelling. However, for podcasting to realize its full potential, like it'll need to make economic sense. So that's why we're here with some amazing, successful podcast makers from across Africa, so that they can tell us and you what does it really take to make African podcasting make economic sense. And so, in terms of getting ready for Africa Podcast Day, we're super excited to get into that conversation. So let's, this is the Africa Podcast Showcase with thanks to the International Podcast Day community. And so it's a conversation, and we hope that everybody can chime in as much as possible with their questions. And just express what you're hearing and what you're feeling about your own podcasts as we go along. And so, let's get into it.
Yeah, so before we dive into the meat of the conversation, we would love to know, I'm sure you're all very curious about who our lovely guests are, a really exciting guest. So before we dive in, let's meet our panelists who are from South Africa, Sierra Leone, and Kenya, who we're going to hear from and speak to today. Let's start with you, Vicky. Tell us about yourself. Tell the world, who is Vicky?
Hi, everyone. I'm Nikki. I am a TV host from Sierra Leone, and I host the Make Sierra Leone Famous podcast, which is very new. We started in the pandemic back in July. I am also very recently a children's book author, just really trying to tell own voices stories about life on the continent and bring our stories to the fore. I'm representing Sierra Leone, and I am currently based in Ghana. I like to think of myself as a diaspora / home base / returnee / not so returnee. Like I'm right on the cusp. So I'm like 1 foot out, 1 foot in, like that.
Fantastic and interesting. Simi, tell us about yourself all the way from South Africa.
Hi, my name is Simi Arap, and I'm host of a podcast called Lesser Known Somebodies, Africa's 8th best podcast and South Africa's best podcast. Those we do not know are real or untrue slogans, but I am rolling with it.
Welcome, Simi. And last but not least, Dan from Kenya.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dan Aseda. I guess I'm just getting into the podcast world. I am the creator of a platform called Simmerbox. We are we are Kenya's first specialist podcasting studio. We're enabling people to make podcasts at extremely low prices. Our goal is to get as many content creators as we can into this new media. And we're actually getting ready to launch a podcasting aggregator a little later this year, and we're looking forward to that.
Fantastic.
Someone just said, I'm at the dentist. That's actually another local South African podcast, Kids Eat Toast. Very cool podcast as well. I just also forgot to add, because I got taken away by the moment, is that I have a podcast company in South Africa called POC Podcasts. Stands for People of Color Podcasts. So yeah, that's where I am at.
Right. So all three of you, because Vicky, if I'm not mistaken as well, you also run a production company, right?
Yes, I have a media marketing company, and we produce television, jingles, et cetera. So I have infrastructure to make my podcast possible. It's definitely not a one-woman show.
Right. So everybody in this room, all our guests are making content, but are also on the back end, like doing production, doing the business of podcasting. Fantastic. This is why we have you on. Let's kick the discussion right off then. And the questions here are for everybody to answer. So it's a discussion rather than like interviews. Sorry, Joe, go right ahead.
Yeah, so I guess we really want to know, guys, why did you start like podcasting, or why did you start recording podcasts for others, in the case of the studio? So let's start with you, Dan. Why did you start your why did you get into podcasting, and how did you finance things when you got started?
I can start with the last question. The financing was from the savings, and we threw all our savings into building a studio, um, and we are now trying to claw our way back and find a way to plug back our savings. So that's kind of the situation at Cinebox. One of the reason that we were inspired to do this is we saw a gap in the market where we had a glut of creators, but there was a lack of infrastructure, and
Mm-hmm.
the question really for us was that a lot of these podcasters are young, they're just emerging, they just started to make maybe first, second episode of their podcast. And the biggest challenge they had is they don't have equipment, they don't have the knowledge, they don't have the skill to actually make the podcast. So I thought I've run a studio since 2009. And so I thought to myself, there's an opportunity for us to actually give some infrastructure to this sector because it's fairly new in Kenya. And I approached the Baraza Media Lab, and they were absolutely 100% committed to it. So together, we created Semabox, which is now this specialist podcasting studio for specifically we're trying to reach emerging podcasters. We do a lot of work for established podcasters as well, but our main focus has been on keeping the young podcaster engaged and helping them make new content as much as possible.
All right. And for you, Simi, how did you get into the meat of being a podcaster in terms of finances?
I was lucky enough to be born into podcasting. I come from a very great podcasting family that have been podcasting for 300 years. So I just decided to take the mantle of podcasting. No, I used to be in radio, and I dig radio. And I'm also a stand-up comedian. Like, that's my profession. And I know some of my favorite comedians used to have podcasts. So I would use the recorder that we got at the radio station to get like news clips from. And I started recording podcasts. And then I left radio because radio didn't want to put me on air. It's like they'd never heard the sultry, sexy voice before. So I went outside of the radio world, and then I started recording podcasts only so I could get back onto radio. Now, the equipment I had at the time was a Zoom H4n, which I funded myself. And much like most of the podcast stuff, you fund it yourself. So whatever I'd earned from comedy, I would take money to pay my rent or whatever, and then I would focus it onto the podcast. I would spend it all there. So yeah, that's how I finance my podcast. But now, of course, we've got many podcasts at our podcast company, and financing that is through other things that we do. So licensing content, advertising, that's what we do.
And for you, Vicky?
Similar to Simi, I got started because my background is in television, so I'm a broadcast journalist. And the problem that I had was that my TV show is only about 25 minutes, but we were having really, really fantastic conversations that I felt like I'm cheating the public out by cutting out this content. And so our first couple episodes actually were just repurposing conversations that we had had on the TV show that I felt were really fascinating and turning those into podcasts. We also had a lot of time on our hand because it was like July and our company had no clients and zero revenue. And so we did have all of our video production equipment. And so, we had a Zoom already. We just used that existing equipment to then start recording drops and editing and putting it together. But now we kind of realize that we do want to have conversations around culture and identity in Sierra Leone. So now we're recording just podcast content and not necessarily repurposing it anymore. It didn't cost anything to set up because we had already incurred the costs from production for TV, so we just use the same equipment. But now our costs, which are recurring, are just like the hosting fees for the podcast. And, I have staff, so I have a production company, so I'm paying my staff monthly, and part of their job is they produce content for anything else. So that's kind of how we got started.
Oh, fantastic.
Okay.
Sorry, Joe, go ahead.
Yeah. So a typical podcaster, really struggles with advertising because advertisers traditionally don't see the ROI in the numbers. So it sounds like there aren't that many opportunities to apply for funding across Africa. We know that podcasters also have risks shutting down because they don't have the cash to sustain the podcast, among others. Some of our favorite podcasts have actually not, stopped production because of that. And then across Africa, and I think everywhere where people are into podcasts, podcasters also get caught in that space between like digging deeper to invest, like you all have talked about, and then leaving the project aside to talk about what actually makes money, keeps the lights on. So, what's been your experience with this conundrum?
I don't
We'll
think it's a
start with
conundrum.
Simi.
I don't think it's a conundrum.
Yeah,
Podcasts don't make money. 99%
yeah.
of podcasts don't make money. Only 1% globally make money. And then you're on a scale of whether that's 10 US dollars or 100 million US dollars, So it's not like we're all of here speaking. But I mean, like if we're 5 people and we have 5 podcasts, that means none of our podcasts could stand a chance. It's 0.5 of them maybe that get sponsored. So I don't look at income via sponsorship. I think looking at sponsorship is actually a weak way of a business of some sort. You can then take that and use the brand, but now you have to start saying, how sustainable is that? Let's say if I had Adidas come to me and they sponsor Lesson on Somebody's, let's say they do it for a year, let's say they do it for 2 years, but it's not forever. It's not a 5-year thing. So you have to find a way of how to make sustainable income. And that's where we work a bit differently at POC Podcasts. So we also license a lot of stuff to, well, I say a lot of stuff. We've licensed 2 podcasts to radio stations, but we will expand that in the future because the licensing agreement gives me a year of passive income of just producing the content. It may not get the listen online, but someone will listen to the content. So now you become a content creator. Right. So we at POC Podcasts, we don't look at podcasts as like these single entities. We look at them as how you look an influencer in the eye. Be like, this is an influencer making content.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I agree.
And for Vicky, sorry, go ahead, Dan.
I was just going to say, I think I agree with Simi's point of view. The only thing I'd add is that syndications are what is an established media business model that has always been there. So radio understands that syndication model, TV understands the syndication model. So it's a really nice model for podcasters to explore. One of the challenges in exploring it is just the technical quality of the stuff that you put out. So this is one of the things that we're helping podcasters raise so that you can be able to play in that kind of market. I do disagree slightly with the other part. This freemium model, I know it's kind of slim and it's really thin, but I think that there's potential because we are going to have more and more higher quality, better produced content, which is going to draw in listeners. And then if we play our cards correctly, maybe as single podcasters, you cannot do the freemium model, but as a bunch of podcasts, you probably will be able to.
So it means that we need to, first of all, band together. And then second of all, it sounds like radio is, for now, one of the best ways for people to now start kind of crossing into podcast revenue. Is that the same for you, Vicky? Like, where does the money reside?
So what I've learned, my background in TV, coming from that and producing a television show for years that was not profitable, has totally prepared me for being a podcaster. Like, the thing is, as a content producer, for most of us, we are ahead of the communities that we live in terms of tech culture, in terms of digital skill sets, just in terms of just like being early adopters of technology. That alone means that you're going to be out in the cold of the desert for a while. That's what I experienced when I launched my TV show in 2008, when Sierra Leone, for the most part, maybe electrification was like 10% of the population and most people didn't have TVs. And I was like, I'm doing a TV show. So, we have to think of ourselves as pioneers, and that means that you're going to take a lot of hit. for me, I think first and most important is to build community. If you focus on producing content that is niche around a specific community, and sometimes it's like a very small community to start, then you can start thinking about, well, for this audience, what matters, who's willing to who's interested in talking to this audience, who's interested in building relationships with them. And so then your podcast it's just like a channel to nurture your audience, isn't necessarily the thing that generates revenue, but it's a thing that builds relationships, build community, that can take things from virtual to actual. Because at the end of the day, anything you're doing in Africa, for it to be really successful, there has to be a human in the picture. That's just who we are. That's just our DNA. And so you have to kind of find a way to channel building that community, so then you can take it off, which is where the money is on the continent. But also, I think there are two types of podcasters, right? Like, we may just be getting into this for community and conversation and like product extension or service extension. Then I don't necessarily know if there's a market in Africa for professional podcasters, right? People who that's all they do for a living. A lot of us already have existing things, and then those are like our main sources of revenue. So this is, again, like Simi said, it's just like an additional way to kind of reach your audience, and then you go find the money somewhere else.
Fantastic. And on a continent where traditional media, we've talked about syndication already, which is, radio is very big. Vicky, you have a TV background, so the TV and radio industries are established, and in a space that's where the convention is, gatekeeping. But a lot of podcasters are, new voices, didn't have a background in media. What do you think is the reality? What's the reality then of being able to tap into this existing revenue stream, like, for example, licensing and so on, considering that the existing business culture is one where, you need to know people, you need to speak a certain way, look a certain way, etc. What do you think of this, Dan?
Yeah, actually, this is a great question for me, because we are actually trying to do precisely that. So what we've discovered in our experience since we started Summerbox September last year, with over 100 episodes, we were at the beginning not able to push an episode out there to anybody for them to listen. We've had to kind of build this separately. But this year now we have phone calls from people who are interested in taking podcasts, because we now have the volume. So the radio station is saying, okay, I may not be necessarily interested in this one podcast because it's too niche for me. The conversations are not specific to the things that I sell to my audience. But because you have enough variety of conversations, I am happy to give you half an hour on Sunday night at 10:30, and you can plug in anybody who's going to fit into that half an hour. So we begin to explore opportunities such as that, and trying to find ways where we can generate the revenue and then split it amongst the people who would be able to create the content that makes that cut. But this is only happening at scale. And for Summerbox, scale is, the 100 podcasts that we've produced so far, podcast episodes that we've produced so far. But I believe that if we had even more, we could leverage that even better. If the idea is to plug into this specific existing business model, which is syndication. Now with freemium, we're also having the same thing happening. People are calling us, telling us we want to be able to advertise on their 100 podcasts, not on just one. So we wanna, if you can plug us, give us a 30-second pre-recorded thing on every podcast, and we have a conversation that we're interested in having now, as opposed to 30 seconds in just the one podcast. So which is what's driving us to say we want to aggregate and make a podcast aggregator, which, again, like I said earlier, we're trying to launch early this year, actually just a few weeks, that we think that will be the opportunity for us to actually operate at a little bigger scale than just the one podcast.
So community, this echoes what Vicky said about community.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
but absolutely. I mean, I agree to a certain extent, but there's something that I also want to caveat it with. I don't think if you spend time building a community, firstly, you have to make something that the community actually likes. But if you talk about something specific, something niche, I mean, in the greater global sense, there is no such thing as niche, because if you're a dude who likes wearing, I don't know, diapers, you'd find a podcast that speaks to you, but it's no longer niche. That thing could have like 150,000 downloads. But I'm saying that if you want to build a community, you have to now feed that community.
Right.
But in my sense, when you're creating like content, if I'm working, for example, with BMW or Mercedes-Benz, they have an existing community. Like, they have it. Why can't I make a product for them that they'll be happy with to feed their community? It doesn't necessarily have to feature on my podcast. I could be a conduit to that. But these existing communities work because, as I agree with Dan, I think syndication is a cool model. I think it's a model that probably, at least in South Africa, I see in the next like 5 years. Sorry, those are my birds outside. This is Africa. I was like, in the next 5 years at least, I think a lot of radio stations would do that. It's cheaper because you buy the content. Advertising you're going to insert anyway. But for me, I think if you're going to make a step up in the podcasting world, it's not going to come from your one-off podcast. It's not most likely to come off that way. But I'm saying if you went to brands and people and said you could be your own media house, you, Mercedes-Benz, you, Dell, you, because then you feed into their market. And whether they use your podcast or use your services, I think that's a way of monetizing stuff.
Vicky, what's your perspective from West Africa?
I totally agree with me. So again, from TV, for years, I was just making content that I wanted to make, kind of in my mind. I thought this was interesting. And then, the year that I actually was profitable was the year that I went to one brand and I said, listen, I'm not going around, and I wasn't going around looking for sponsorship for everybody. It was just that I felt like their particular product fits exactly well within the DNA of my show. And I was like, I want to build you guys into this show. And so they gave me money for that. So definitely, I think where there might be money is, yes, I feel like it's going local content, and depending on this, the size or reach of your podcast, going to that, not necessarily, some people are waiting for like MTN to give them money, they're waiting for Mercedes-Benz to give them money, but within your own community, like in your city, there might be companies and brands that you can approach and say, listen, my audience and my podcast and your brand really fit well together, and this is how. Here's what we talk about, and here's what I know you care about, and you really kind of pitch it in a way that like this is a collaboration on content to an audience that we both care about, to an audience that we both want to reach in whatever way. And I think those relationships are going to be way more successful. But also the reality is, let's just be honest, a lot of people don't necessarily also have the reach. The unfortunate thing is that every day you hear that Kim Kardashian and like Rihanna and this, everybody's signing multi-million-dollar like podcast contracts who are celebrities who already have millions and millions of followers. And so in people's minds, they're like, oh, I can make millions from this podcasting. What is it? Give me the money. If you already have audiences, if they dropped water tomorrow, 1 million people are going to buy the water, right? So you just have to remember that, like, you don't have that reach, and just be very realistic about what you can do within the local context of your local community, your podcast in your local community, and finding those people who are going to be like minds. Don't waste your time sending proposals to banks and this and that, because it's like a waste of time. Think a little bit more below the ones who are constantly advertising all over the place, those like mid SMEs, medium-sized startups, et cetera, et cetera. And you know what? You just launched an app. I have a podcast, and so maybe there's synergy here. What can we do together? And it may not always be like the largest price points in terms of like revenue for you, but it is revenue. And if you think about that, replicating that 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, then you can have, the revenue streams coming in.
Yeah, I'll tell you what I'm doing. My next step that we're doing, specifically with my podcast, is that I have a friend who runs a bunch of coffee shops. So I'm making him play my podcast, and then of course music in between. So like every 3 or 4 hours, then a different episode pops up. And the main reason why is that A, I like his coffee. He'll sponsor the podcast. I know it because it's in my community. And B, people can listen to it. because we don't know who listens to these things. We see numbers, but we want someone who listens to it that goes, man, that sounds cool. Maybe they work for a marketing company. Maybe they work for an MTN. Maybe they work for a big boy. But why am I aiming for those guys? They're going to ask me for 150,000 downloads.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic tip there. Tips there. So go local.
Yeah, and go small.
Yes.
Yeah,
And also, when you talk about,
local and small,
I mean,
totally local and small. I really believe local and small. Like it's my whole ammo, local and small.
Simi, you talked about the number of downloads. How important is that as a way of measuring success?
I think you have to look at downloads in two ways. If you have to look at downloads by yourself on a podcast that you have, and you're in Africa, then you go like, oh, what am I comparing it with? Am I comparing it with Joe Rogan Experience? Because then I've got a very bad podcast. Let me tell you that. Am I comparing it with a local radio station? Then I'd be like, okay, cool. If they're getting, let's say, for example, 30,000 downloads on a piece of content, and you're getting like 5,000 to 8,000 downloads, then you're doing pretty well because they are a radio station who are promoting the hell out of the content. They are a big brand. Then you are winning. So, and I tell guys not to focus on the numbers. So what we're doing with our podcast that we have, of course, like my podcast and a couple of others are big numbered podcasts. Like they get a lot of downloads, and others are small, like 100 downloads. But I say, don't worry about the numbers, because when we go to a brand, we say, hey, listen, brand, you like podcast X, but podcast X only gets 100 downloads by itself. But the advert that we run is going to run on all the podcasts. So you're going to get in that week 100,000 people listening to this podcast, to this advert. And there's a branded piece of content for you. So I'm like, that's why I don't worry about numbers so much. But if you are in Africa and you have a podcast and you're watching this live stream and you're getting 200 downloads, I think you're doing very well for yourself.
Absolutely.
Because I also don't know, people sometimes are shy with their numbers. They don't like saying like, hey, I get this amount of numbers. I'm like, I'm not. I'll tell you. Like on my last one, I got 5,800. Do I think it's good? Yeah. Do I think it's bad? Yeah.
Yeah, Dan, you started saying something. Huh?
Yeah, actually, for me, the number that's more important for people to keep track of is how much of the podcast people are listening to. I think if you are, it's kind of I've been a musician for a long time as well, and the number on YouTube, we've always been in this numbers fight, right? How many views do you have? Blah blah blah.
Yeah.
But what I've learned from my music career, which I share with people that we make podcasts for, is that if people are actually listening to your podcast through, that's a more successful podcast than if you have people listening for a minute and a half. And for me, the specific metric is how long are people staying on your podcast, because that is the most important metric for you to learn where to place your adverts. Secondly, what kind of topics you speak, the pace of your podcast, the style, the tone, like what do you do to make content that's keeping people on the platform, keeping people listening to you. I believe it's more, if there's some podcasts we're incubating, and what I speak to them every week when we do the analytics is how many people are staying and at what point are people dropping off. So once we learn, okay, people are dropping off here, then we know, okay, we have become into why is that happening, and what can we improve? What can we do so that they don't drop off so early? Let's try and keep them for 10 minutes, and so on and so forth. I think if you're going to look at numbers, I would strongly recommend that you focus on the part of the podcast where people are actually listening, and where engagement peaks. What are people commenting? That's a more stronger number than you have 6,000. You have 60,000 listens, because we know that the platforms count the listens for 30 seconds. So we know that in the back of our minds. Do you want people to listen to 30 seconds of your podcast?
Well, we know that, but do brands know that? I don't think the guy from MTN knows.
We're telling them now.
The guy from MTN doesn't go, so how long did the 20 people listen for? Like, well, like 87% of the podcast. They're just like, okay, there's only 20.
That is true, and it makes for some really interesting conversations, because like you said, at scale now you can have the conversation, right? Like we've got these 10 podcasts, your advert can go on all the 10 podcasts, and now we can tell you that we have 2,000 people who are going to listen through your advert for reals. And they're going to be tuned in. Radio can't do that. So we have an edge over radio. Radio doesn't know who's listening. They're just like, we think, we know we broadcast on the whole city. So we're going to do some research based on some surveys, and people are going to tell lies, which we know also. So we don't know. Radio can't really tell you how many people for real are listening. Podcasting can. And I think it's if we start doing at scale, we might be able to find a better value proposition to advertisers, as long as we keep our prices really low at this point and just help them to just keep exploring with us. We'll probably build the price point later.
You've answered the question somebody is asking in the chat. Somebody is asking what's the workaround. So Dan, you've answered that question.
Yeah, Vicky, so go ahead.
So the other thing, I mean, for podcasters sometimes is that, you know, they focus on production and not enough on promotion, right? So that's the thing about producing content, that then you have this other job of like, okay, it's great. You know, now you have to do promotion. So, you know, like with my team, what I tell them is that like we produce and we promote. That's the job, right? And as a podcaster, sometimes, you know, like I'm in marketing, so I understand this through and through. And a lot of people don't get into the habit of promoting the content so that you can get the downloads and also meeting people where they are, right? Is there a blog that you're using to amplify your podcast when they come out? Where are you pushing it out on your WhatsApps, right? Your WhatsApp groups. Like, you really have to be guerrilla 101 marketing sometimes to get the word out there. And then once you have content, some content is just incredibly evergreen. And to not forget that just because you have a new episode, then you kind of forget. So it's like a 20, I don't want to say 24/7, but around the clock kind of production, promotion, and branding as well, because I think that sometimes you may not necessarily have the stats and the hits and the downloads, but if your podcast is well branded and visible, brands see it. They may never listen to your podcast, but when they think podcast and they're trying to be trendy, they're like, oh, so-and-so has a podcast. Let's just call them and throw money at them, because right now, you know, I went to one conference, they said that podcast is the next thing in Africa. We have to reach these people with the podcast. Boom.
That's so true.
Like, you know, we're pioneers, and so it means that we have to sometimes, I hate to say this, but you got to fake it a little bit till you make it, right? You have to make your podcast look bigger and more professional, especially if you don't have the downloads and to back it up. It means that on the brand front, on the look and feel of your podcast, you got to make it look really rich. You got to make it look like Nigerian. You know, I'm part Nigerian. So you got to get some Nigerian swag into your podcast look. Come out with your whole chest. Even if you have 100 people listening to you, you talk like you are, those 100 people, you are changing their lives. Your content is their bread and butter every day. And when you have that kind of confidence with what you're producing, people take you seriously.
I say lie, guys. I've told people, you know, I started off this thing when I introduced myself. I said Africa's 8th best podcast. That's a blatant lie. When I walk through the streets and someone that listens to the podcast comes after me and go, oh, it's Simi from Africa's 8th best podcast. It's a blatant lie, but it works. It works. There's another guy that I told Melissa and Josephine about. His name is Dean. Dean works at a broadcasting place in South Africa. He is a digital strategist. He focuses on podcasts for radio stations. And he says the amount of times people lie, he says he loves it. He says because he's only there to judge the idea if they can sell something on it. He says he doesn't care if it has downloads. Someone told him it's like they've got the most downloads in African history. When did we start recording the history? When did we start recording? Up until 2 weeks ago, I didn't know that people like Dan and Vicky existed. So I had to go find them. I'm saying like, so lie. If Vicky is going to secure that MTN bag and she needs help from her friend Simi to say she has 180,000 downloads and a consumption rate of 97%, we're not screenshotting these things and sending them to people. Make your money, boo-boo. Make your money.
the thing though, just to add to kind of what Simi is saying, and maybe just to help people with the business language, you have a data point and then you embellish. So if you have 100 listeners, you should say we are listening to, we are reaching hundreds of people. So it's a little bit of embellishment. You do have the hundreds, and then it just it's 100, one of many, right? And I think that's probably the best way to do it, because what we're experiencing recently with some of the what has happened like in the last 1 week is there is a little more focus in people checking how the podcast is doing in the conversations we've had, and I've found that when I said we are reaching thousands, hundreds of thousands, it worked a little better than when we said we were listening to millions, because we could prove the hundreds of thousands, even though we are barely over 100,000 listens. But we can show the screenshot. here's our 100,000 of most latest data points.
It's just a CVS file, my friend. Download it into Excel zeros.
Someone's commented and said, "Is it lying or predicting the future?" So you're saying there will be hundreds.
I like this woman. I like it. This woman will go far. She will go far.
But she's
also, I think it's you need with your best number, right?
Yeah.
That like sometimes, okay, you may be engagement is your number. I mean, Facebook does a really great job. When you have a Facebook page, when you can get the insights on the back end, you see they tell you sometimes maybe you don't have a lot of likes on your page, right? You may not have a lot of likes, but your reach may be different. Maybe your engagement is different. So you have to kind of focus on your strength and use that to lead conversation and build a whole narrative as to why that is the most important thing about podcasts. These downloads, the people who don't know this industry, they think it is the downloads. Don't let them tell you that. What matters is something else. Tell them your truth. Because as Donald Trump has taught us all, it is only your own truth that matters. That's the only truth that matters.
Oh man, thank you so much to everyone who's commenting and sharing your comments on Twitter, in the YouTube comment section. Just keep them coming. We're reading them. Thank you for being here with us. We'll continue. We're continuing the conversation.
Yeah. So, what would you say? Well, actually, this is very important. We've talked about how you began and started, and it's come from savings largely, and just your own investments. But what's kept you going? And just tying back into the last question Joe asked about other metrics that matter beyond money. What else matters to you about podcasting, about your storytelling through podcasting? So if you got the bag. And stopped needing to worry about your costs and so on going forward, what else would then be keeping you passionate about doing this? If you're passionate, does passion even matter?
Sorry, I didn't hear the last part. You said, does passion matter? Yes.
So the question is, beyond money, does anything else, what else matters about your podcasting journey?
Honestly, for me, I mean, I'm from a country of 7 million where internet penetration is just about 10 to 11%, still very, very small. Everything I've done in the tech and digital space, I've, especially where content is concerned, I've been a pioneer, I've been like one of the first people, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not the first person to have a podcast in Sierra Leone. There are lots of young people who are also doing podcasts, or people in the diaspora. And I think what it is for a lot of us, it's not so much about passion in as much as you're trying to find other outlets to tell a story about where you're from, what life is like there, who's there, what art, creativity. A lot of us are creative. So it really comes from just wanting to tell us to the world and show that we're also here in Sierra Leone. Yes, we too, we have podcasts, not just like mudslides and negative stories. We also have, we're just like the rest of Africa with whatever's going on here. So I think it comes from that. Also, I think, for me, passion is a little dead in general as a motivation for doing anything. Because again, passion is easy to talk about when you're like well fed and you have a roof over your head and everything's okay. And a lot of times those who can do these things and not worry about money come from a place of privilege. So the fact that we can do this, even though we're talking about money right now, the reality is that to be a podcaster on the continent, you must be coming from some position of privilege. And probably that's the case for all over the everywhere in the world, like to podcast. So it's not really about, yes, I have a 5-year-old in my house who is now decided he wants to be on the show. So no, for me, it's not really about passion. It's more true. It's more so that I'm just like, there's stories that need to be told about Sierra Leone. There's stories that need to be told about Africa, but not necessarily for a foreign audience. For me, my content is very much so for Sierra Leoneans, about Sierra Leoneans. So it's half English, it's half Creole, which is our lingua franca. And we just talk, we talk. We're trying to figure it out, and we're figuring it out through conversations on the podcast.
I think for me, it's I only have one passion in this world, is money. And people always laugh when I say that. It's like, Dan is laughing. I love money. Money is my passion. Money is my passion. I also happen to just be a person that loves creating things. I mean, that's the only thing that separates me. Whether I'm on stage and creating something, whether I'm writing something, whether I'm making a podcast. And of course, through my creativity, I want to feed myself and my family. So for me, it's money. So when I have a podcast company and I want to sell the podcast, I want to sell them to make money. That's it. That's the bottom line. And the only way we can, and especially in Africa, because this is the Wild West over here. People from overseas have struggled to come and set up companies on our continent for years. For years. After colonialism, they just bounced, but they don't know how to do it. If they had to come over here, if a big podcast company came down to Africa, leaves just South Africa, they came to Africa, and they're like, okay, what are we going to do? Of course, they'll just have to spend a lot of money to catch up, because that's the thing. Because the other day we were talking about, what if a big company, for example, Spotify came, we would like for them to speak to us. I don't know if they would speak to us. I don't know, because they're just like, we throw $100,000 and we can make our own anything. We can make our own African stories. Why must I pay these people money to make African stories for me? So I'm just like, and also we must understand in an African context, it's so much cheaper for us to record our stuff compared to guys overseas. I mean, like I'm talking about I think it costs me maybe, if I wanted to record someone for an hour, 800 Rand, which is $60 US. So you're like, it's dirt cheap over here. So of course a big corporation can come and buy us up. But what I'm trying to say basically is that my passion is money. And the reason why I do this thing is to make more money. So if there's anybody watching this thing from the Philippines, Cape Verde, USA, I don't know where you are in the world, but if you got money, if you got matcha, hit me up. Hit me up. I'll spend that thing.
There you hear it, Dan.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like Simi. I make content so that I can sell it. That's the purpose that I make content for. The one thing I will add to what Simi is saying is that I also make content because I'm very good at making this content, and I know the angles of how to make this content as well. So my guarantee is I can make this content much better than anybody else can make this content in the world. So. And I'm no longer afraid of saying that, because I have proven that I can make this content better than anybody else in the world. So yeah, I'm like Simi. You want the content that looks, sounds, is authentic, is real, is at the top quality. I'm your guy, and I want your money as well.
Send money to Dan. You come to me. You come to me. Send money to Dan, and then send money to Vicky. Vicky already got a child. She already got a. She's been on TV. Dan, send the money to.
African women are the ones that need the money. Let us just. The men are collecting. Look at Museveni. Let us collect money. Please, it is time for the women. Don't forget us when you are bringing money.
Exactly.
So you're proving, I think you guys in all the content that you've produced so far that it's excellent content. Bring the money. If we have, and that's the place to drop the mic.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's true. I think I just also want to say one thing before we wrap up. And like, African content is really, really good. I feel pretty bad that I have to do my show in English when I know that the African content has so many different dialects. And I'm searching for different vernacular podcasts. I am. And when I have a budget, I'll produce one because I know that that stuff will pop. And I don't know how it is for other countries, but I know that the key to success in the podcast industry in Africa is to speak the people's language. And English isn't that. English isn't that.
No. English is also not sweet enough. Like if I want to talk something, English just not sweet. I'm not able to put pepper, I'm not able to put salt, I'm not able to put maggi, underlay. It's sweet. English doesn't do that. It really just doesn't. So I totally agree with you. But I think also it's that, being an African, there is a certain level of like double consciousness, right? Whenever you're producing content online, there is this thing of like, I need white people to notice. Like, if I'm only doing it local, if it's only for local people and it's not accessible to the rest of the world, will my content be relevant? The answer is yes. Of course, the answer is yes. But right now, I feel like it may not necessarily get you money, right? Because then the people who control the industry and the who make people relevant globally, right? They can't listen, they can't write about it, they can't say it's the, Timi's podcast is the 8th most important podcast on the continent if they can't understand it, right? And so we're all kind of hedging our bets on the fact that, if we put our content online and we make it globally accessible, then it's going to give us some kind of legitimacy in an industry where we're only just emerging, both within our own countries and on the continent as a whole.
Exactly. There's so many languages, and we're always talking about this at Africa Podcast, about how we speak English because we're trying to connect regionally, but also, there's French, there's Portuguese, there's Arabic. There's so many other widely spoken languages across the continent that we aren't even yet, addressing as a festival. So we've only just begun. This is only scratching the surface, and the perspectives of 5 of us on this panel is only representing a very small portion of what there is to be said about podcasting on the continent, because we're speaking English, Yes.
But do you know, guys, that when we're looking for content, there's this thing about, even if you make it in another language, where will it be translated? And there are platforms like the one we're on right now, where you can click on the bottom of the screen and the settings will allow you to read in whatever language you need to read in. So, guys, I think cross-posting can help in terms of...
Does that any of our accents?
Does the thing work? I think we're just trying to get the gist of what
does it catch any of our accents?
We're just trying to get the gist.
These algorithms pick up like...
Sasa, now that...
If we spoke like this, they'd pick it up. Like the transcription would be great. But if we are speaking and sounding African, they're never going to pick us up.
I'm happy to write the new algorithm though. So if someone's got a budget, I'm going to write that algorithm so that we can actually hear the Pidgin accent, the East African accent, the South African accent. I mean, I have the skill set, so let's just do it. And then we can sell that as an extension to the platform.
Dan, don't give these people our ideas.
I love on the call. Listen, I can code that. Just give me the money. I can code it. Is this an algorithm you want?
Yeah.
Let's take this offline, Dan. Let's not give the world our secrets here. Man. We don't know how many people are watching here. Now Germany's doing it.
So there's a meeting after this meeting. So we will have to have this conversation continue there. But before we do, guys, this conversation about money, I mean, it's gotten so many people talking. People are asking us, this thing is hard. Can your panelists tell us how to crack it? Can you guys give like a parting shot before we have to jump off about, where's the money in African podcasting from your perspective? What would you say to someone who wants something to walk away with?
I would say, honestly, go to that small business, not necessarily small as in size, but like an SME within your community, in your city, that is doing well, that has, I say go for a business that has money coming in every day, right? That has customers walking in every day, and go pitch. Okay, hold on. I'll tell you in a second. And go pitch your podcast to them, but with them in mind, right? So not a lot of times when people are marketing products, they're very focused on themselves and the product itself, and not how that product or service is going to solve a problem or meet a need of the customer. So that potential, that the person who you want to advertise on your podcast or sponsor it, you have to pitch your podcast in a way where your podcast is going to answer a problem that they currently have. That problem might be bringing in customers every day. That problem might be promoting a new, their Christmas promotion, et cetera, et cetera. Find a way to make your podcast relevant to them within the local content beyond, and don't worry about how many downloads you have. If you can show that you can be a champion for their brand and their product, they'll give you some money. I truly believe that.
All right, Dan?
Yeah, I think you just have to be yourself as much as possible. There's only one version of that in the world, and that's the version that you are able to sell the best. And I think that's the one that you've got to be at your peak, the peak of your powers.
I'm gonna. Mine is a somber note. I tell everybody, I was like, guys, there is no money. Stop starting at that starting point. Stop. If you're doing this thing to make money, tell us, the whole world, every single day. Every single time you Google podcasts and you click on news, every third article is about how do we make money in podcasts. This is a world problem. This is not like an African problem. This is a global problem. I mean, if aliens had podcasts, they would have the same problem. How to monetize this thing. So I'm saying don't start off on the basis of I'm doing a podcast to make money. I like money. I do. But just start making the podcast. Make a good, high quality podcast that is interesting. Because I promise you, there are a lot of bad podcasts out there. For every failed journalist, there's a 10-part podcast waiting to happen. Waiting. So I mean, like, just go make something that's good that people enjoy. It will come, but it will take a long time. It's not gonna. If you start in January, it's not gonna happen in Feb.
Absolutely.
Definitely. Thank you for laying it out clearly. I don't want anyone to come after us and say you guys didn't tell us. Everybody's looking for the same answer. Everyone wants to know, where do we find you now? Our dear panelists, where do we find you? We're at Africa Podfest, and if you're loving this conversation, after this, run to the website at the bottom of the screen. www.africapodcastfestival.com. We will be having a full day of conversations just like this on February 12th, and we want you to be part of it. Where can we find you, Simi? Where can we find you, Vicky? Where can we find you, Dan?
If you look at my screen, you'll see my handle, @SimiArif. And when you do that, you will find me on every platform in this beautiful world God has given us. You will find it there. And if you want to find my podcast company, it's www.pocpods.com or here POC Pods on Instagram, Twitter, and everything else. And we have a simple slogan there. We make podcasts.
Yeah, I am on @Danaseda on everything. And my podcast aggregator is semabox.live. So we'll be there, I think, in about a week and a half.
Hi,
Vicky?
Yeah, I'm Vicky Ramo, as you can see, on everything, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, everywhere, YouTube. And if you're still watching, don't forget to go to Amazon and buy my new children's book, Adama Loves Akara. everywhere.
Please don't forget to buy Vicky's book, please, guys.
Yeah,
It's on
we need to
Amazon.
buy. And Vicky's mini me needs to give us a wave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Vicky's son has a lot to say about podcasting and books.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Hi.
I think we're hey son. Hi. So so I think we're closing out of our time. Thank you so much to everyone who was able to join us. Thank you, Simi Aref. Thank you, Vicky Remo. Thank you, Dan Aseda, and thank you to Dave from and the International Podcast Day community. We want to continue these conversations. See you on February 12th. The website is at the bottom of the screen. Tickets are available now.
Thank you.
Great
you, Melissa.
Yeah, great conversation, everybody. This is really
Thank
great.
you, Dave.
No problem. Yeah, definitely go ahead out, hit up Africa Podcast Festival. I'll add it to the stream here again. Coming up, February 21st, right? So we're only like 3 weeks
No, the
away
12th.
from that.
February 12th.
Yes.
February 12th.
Yep.
Yep.
I may have said 21st earlier, so my apologies. Yeah, February 12th coming up. Great events. It's going to be great year in, year out. Melissa and Josephine, I'm glad we've been able to connect. Simi, Vicky, and Dan, thank you so much for being a part of the conversation. This is always great to again show what's happening in the African countries, and thank you so much for everybody's insights and talents.
All right.
All right. Well, everybody, that is going to wrap up the January
Bye, everyone.
edition of Podcaster Showcase. Until next month, happy podcasting. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Yeah, I mean,